It's 6 o'clock, we have a quorum, I believe. Mike, would you call the roll?
Sure. Member Phil Lively. Malcolm Dudley is excused. Member Malsbeck. Here. Member Ringham. Member Conlon.
Here.
Member Scott Lane.
Here.
Member Jim Jans.
Here.
Member Ellen Jameson.
Here.
Chairperson Paul Jones.
Here.
And Councilperson Carrie Wiest.
Here.
Okay, we're off and running.
Is Narissa Dexter not on the committee anymore?
She is, but she's excused also.
She has been ill.
She's what?
She's got very poor health.
Oh,
She offered to resign several months ago, and I encouraged her not to in hopes that her health would improve, but it hasn't. And I've not asked her to resign since then.
she lives in William Park.
I'm not sure.
What happened to Jack?
He's right here.
He's right behind you.
I was gonna say, we can't have a meeting without Jack.
And here is Marissa, welcome back.
Thank you, I'm feeling so much better.
Good. I was just offering your excuse, and it's not necessary. That's grand.
Okay.
Full house except for Nelson.
Yeah, except for Malcolm, that's everyone. Okay, do we have public comments? Tony, do you have anything to say?
I know, I'm just sitting here listening to what's going on, I just one comment, the reason I want to come is because of the lawsuit on electrification.
Yes.
I wondered if anyone had looked at the option of using a conversion to natural gas versus going on off electrification.
They looked at very few options. They took a very cursory look at some of the more modern diesel equipment.
And when I looked at their report, I didn't see anything on natural gas.
Well, the purpose of the project is to electrify.
Exactly.
So they were not interested in bringing in options that could put a serious challenge on
In
electrification.
response, because that's something we can do,
Well, that's why we're filing suit.
but is that a possibility in the suit? To show alternatives which are better from the environmental point of view?
The suit charges them to consider alternatives that are potentially better.
In that, can you also suggest alternatives?
Well, if it's ruled that they have to do it, then certainly we will suggest alternatives.
But
Whether we
If
can
suggested alternatives
enjoin the
that-
judge to require them to look at them, I don't know how.
But what I'm saying is that the judge probably wouldn't know there's alternatives unless you tell them.
Well, there's been correspondence before, from the town to Caltrain, suggesting alternatives.
No, and specifically to gas, to make them gas instead of something else.
That has been suggested, yes.
Could I also just real quickly remind everybody that as all the council or committee meetings now are being audio and videotaped.
With this one microphone.
Actually, these two right here.
Powerful.
Are there other public comments?
no.
No? Okay. Next comes the approval of minutes. Do I have comments? You were all given copies of the minutes along with the agenda for this meeting.
I have a question regarding minutes, is that,
Yes, please raise it.
in regard to the depot maintenance, it says that, you received my letter. Was the letter read in the meeting? I was not here at the last.
No, I just indicated that we received your letter itemizing all the issues, and then based on that, I was gonna be preparing a letter to Caltrain.
That you would be preparing a letter to Caltrain?
Yes, on behalf of the town.
And has that been done?
Yes, it was just recently sent though.
So there's no improvement yet?
No improvement yet.
No, I know that. I just checked again.
Okay, that's why there's
So how
no
long ago
improvement.
did they receive the letter?
Oh, I don't know, probably just within the last week.
I wish somebody in the town would take it as higher on the priority list. I see no reason for that whole area to continue to be neglected. We now we have a decaying depot, and we have the world's largest collection of chips out here in various piles. And as the rains come, the aroma comes also. Fortunately, or unfortunately, we haven't had too many rain, which is bad for the country, but in the agriculture. But it protects us from the aroma that decaying wood chips cause. So between the decaying of the depot and the use of this as a lot, the town says, we don't care what it looks like. We'll wait, the rest of you who live here, while we're waiting for the civic center to be built and for some kind of magic to make the depot better. The rest of us who live here and drive this way and go by the town center have to look at that. And I have done about as much as I can do on it, and I really wish that perhaps the rail committee could make a recommendation to the city council, or somebody could help us get some action taken to improve that area.
I think those chips in past years have been accumulated at the park
Right,
rather than in the parking lot.
right. They have.
So I don't know why they ended up in the parking lot this year, do you?
I think it had to do with the removal of some trees that were there. There was some removal of trees there. I
Oh,
know that
so they
were
just
chipping.
put the chips where they fell.
One tree kind of collapsed.
Yeah.
My other question about the minutes is, I don't know why we keep them. It's only a list of processes. You can't tell what the content, if you missed a meeting as I did, you can't tell what happened. You can tell who spoke and what their purpose was, but the guts of what they say is not there. And I have mentioned this before too, but if this is supposed to help the public, or it's supposed to help absent members, it's too brief.
The minutes are pretty well restricted to the official actions taken by the committee. And that has been the practice in the past. In other committees I've served on, we've had more extensive minutes prepared, but this committee has not had them in the past.
Yeah, I think the intent is not to be verbatim, and I think we're going to get better when we have the ability to watch video as well. So I know that doesn't help right this minute, but the goal is to hopefully have everybody.
So that if you miss a meeting, you can go and watch it on here.
Yeah.
And that's possible now. You can actually go onto the town's website and get access to the last rail committee meeting.
I'm old, I still read paper and find it useful, because then I make comments on it. At any rate, okay, I'll stand informed.
Other comments concerning the minutes? Do you have a motion to approve?
I'll do it again.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
That's okay.
All right, we move now into the regular agenda. The first item on the agenda is the update on the electrification secret suit that the town has filed against Caltrain. Mike?
Just a very brief update. Apparently the settlement conference has occurred. I'm not sure, I mean, it sounds like it's recent. I did not attend. It was attended by city manager. And then also, Jim, I believe you were present as a representative of one of the.
Right, at CCHSR.
And then there was another person. Was there?
Transdev
Trans.
representative, yeah, Dave Schoenbrook.
And where was this?
It was at the Hanson Bridget Law Firm in the city about 2 weeks ago.
And what was the meeting?
It was a settlement, mandatory settlement conference.
Was
which
it
is
conducted by the
required
court?
By law, by,
Was there a representative of the court there?
no,
Why not?
it's not necessary.
Normally, the court would have an independent arbitrator at those meetings.
Well, it's not the way this one was done.
Well, did the court err?
Pardon?
Did the court err?
I don't think so.
Because I was just at a meeting last week where they appointed an independent arbitrator, and we settled the matter out without going to court, but it had an independent volunteer
Right.
designated by the court who arbitrated.
Yeah, that can be done, and not being litigated, right, that's how you say the differences. But when the parties agree to get together and meet, that constitutes a
It
settlement.
wasn't directed by the court.
I'm not sure what, if they just advise the court of it, or what, I don't know. Because
So who conducted the meeting?
Well, Stuart Flashman is the attorney representing the town, my group CCHSR and Transdev on the one side. And on the other side was the Hanson Bridget attorney that represents Caltrain, and they have a special counsel that they hired on the CEQA litigation. So there were the two attorneys on the other side, and
Sounds like Marion Lee was
Marion
there.
Lee was there for Caltrain, and I'm trying to think if anybody else was there.
Who was in charge of it? Was there a guy running it?
Who ran the meeting?
No, Stuart started things rolling.
There was no mediator or no?
No, it was not set up with an arbitrator or a mediator.
Who called the meeting?
The attorneys from both sides.
And as I understand, it's when with the CEQA lawsuits, it's a mandatory meeting to have a settlement conference.
Now, it would seem to me if it's called a settlement conference, that implies that a settlement has to be reached at that meeting, which I think is absurd.
Or it can be reached, not necessarily
Doesn't
has to.
require a settlement.
To attempt to reach one.
Uh-huh,
Correct.
okay.
What court are we in?
I think it's in the,
Well, let's see now, the
San Mateo
lawsuit
County?
was filed in San Mateo County, but there's a provision in the, I get this information from Stuart, there's a provision that says that, if San Mateo County is involved in the lawsuit, and the reason they're involved in the lawsuit is they're one of the 3 counties that finance Caltrain and run Caltrain. There's a obscure provision in California law that says, in that event, the case has to be moved out of San Mateo County by the court. That has been heard. I don't know the decision. I don't know where it was moved or when it was moved.
By the same token, it couldn't be in San Francisco
Can't be in San
or
Francisco,
Santa
it
Fe.
can't be in San Jose. Has to be taken someplace.
Sounds like we're going back to Sacramento, doesn't it?
No, probably not.
no, there was some discussion of Contra Costa, I think.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's been decided or ruled upon.
And Mike's
And the
right.
settlement
yeah.
conference is still open,
Yeah.
in the sense that,
Well, was there a court hearing to start with to have the meeting? I mean, how did the meeting get established?
I wasn't at it, but I would imagine there probably was a court hearing at one point before that meeting. So the meeting occurred, there were some suggestions made. First of all, the meeting is supposed to remain confidential. There were some suggestions made by both sides of things to be considered along settlement lines. And, the whole thing took about 45 minutes. And then we left. And we're expecting to hear something in writing as a proposal from Caltrain. Or on the other hand, they could tell us to go pound sand.
Well, was our legal counsel available at that meeting?
Yes, as you said, Stuart Flashman.
Well, no,
our
but
counsel
was our
there.
city counsel there?
No, the city manager was there.
Where it's contracted to Stu, and the city manager
Yeah.
was there.
But Stu represents all 3 parties on.
Mike is probably right. CEQA probably, I'm not an expert, but it probably contains a provision saying, in a CEQA lawsuit, the parties all have to get together early in the game to see whether they can settle. It doesn't require some judge or arbitrator or mediator to be there. It's like a meet and confer. You all have to get together and talk. See if you can get this thing resolved without any expense from the state. Get together voluntarily and talk it over. So that's what they did.
So
And my understanding, no agreement or settlement was reached
It's the first step
So
and the
far.
cheapest step.
so far.
Right.
I guess I'm not that familiar with the law myself, but having just gone through this last week in another proceeding, I was able, an independent arbitrator came in and we settled the issue and he forced it. And I say, without somebody there forcing the issue, I don't know how you get anything done. I mean, who's gonna agree to anything? You're gonna be a bunch of good guys and sit around and agree to stuff? You gotta have somebody there to force them.
Well, if the law's written so that nobody.
Well, did we follow the law? That's my question.
Yes, the CEQA law was followed.
Are you sure?
Stu Flashman is very experienced in CEQA
Well,
law. He knows what.
I would like to have something in writing that says that an independent arbitrator was not required. If he's so confident that he did it right, then I'd like to get an opinion from him that he said that, because I can't understand why it wasn't.
Well, I think if it progresses and there's no ground getting in either direction, then clearly there's gonna be people in between in arbitration and so on and so forth. But I think the first preliminary step, at least my understanding, is exactly this. It's a little less formal, seeing what your grounds are. They already know where we're coming from, coming to the table saying, hey, and that's where a letter I think is being written by Caltrain saying, hey, here's where we are gonna concede or give you, and that may be coming out in this particular meeting that you had that didn't take a lot of money on either side. And the state kind of just says, your first meeting's a little less formal. It will get more formalized as it progresses if you guys don't come together. And I think that you may be in a situation where it was a little bit more progressed, and they said, hey, some courts will say, go in there and argue this out, and come back in and tell me where you guys sit. And
Well, but they provided an independent arbitrator to help.
Mm-hmm.
and this is when the two attorneys get together and say, hey, let's come together and see if we can get to a meeting of the minds. And if we can do it this way and it'd be cheaper for all parties, then I think that's the first step.
I may be off base here, but it doesn't seem consistent with the law I just went through last week.
Well, this is not the arbitrated settlement conference. This is an initial meeting of the parties to lay out the issues.
I
But
guess I
it's a
wanna-
mandatory settlement conference, I believe. What's mandatory is having the conference, not reaching a settlement.
Right.
All right. Enough said.
Okay, other comments? Mike, do you have more to say on?
No, I think the only other thing is that the next step is that the full city council will be briefed in closed session next Wednesday at the city council.
On what happened at the meeting.
Yes.
It's gonna be a brief meeting.
They never are. You know better than that.
Okay.
Okay, the next item is the TOS lawsuit, which is proceeding in a very slow but satisfactory manner. A great deal of attention has been given over the last few months to get the documents settled for the record. The Attorney General submitted something like 200 documents, which the plaintiffs generally accepted. And the plaintiffs had an additional set, when sometimes duplicate set, of some 380 documents that have been submitted to the Attorney General, and chances are that there will be objections to a number of those. That's the status of that right now. There is a court hearing in
This Friday,
this Friday.
Sacramento.
In
The court will make
Sacramento.
a decision on what the evidence will be at the trial. And we will also attempt at the time to get the court to assign a trial date this summer. So this matter will be resolved in trial.
The issues in that case are trip time. The plaintiffs claim that it is not possible to meet the trip time requirements, Proposition 1A, that's 30 minutes San Francisco to San Jose, 2 hours and 40 minutes San Francisco to Los Angeles. The second item there is the requirement for a subsidy. The estimated operating costs that the High Speed Rail Authority has put forth are about a third of the experience cost of the Osceola trains on the East Coast and less than half of the admitted costs of other high-speed rail systems around the world. The next item is that the blended system violates Proposition 1A. That's a sister case to the one we'll be looking at in just a minute, because the handling of the peninsula is directly contrary to Proposition 1A. It stipulates that all money spent, all of the bond money that is spent must be exclusively for complete high-speed rail, not mixes of other traffic. It has to be pure high-speed rail. And the final issue that's been raised is that as of the moment, there's no accepted way to get over the Tehachapi Pass. And that's just a minor irritant for the High-Speed Rail Authority, but it's one that they don't seem to be able to grapple with.
No accepted way to what? Get over what?
The Tehachapi Pass.
The mountain range.
And from Bakersfield Bakersfield to Tehachapi, which is at the top of the pass, and then on to Barstow and Palmdale. What's the L town down there?
Palm Springs,
Which side
No.
of the?
Palm Desert,
No, it starts with an,
Starts with an L.
yeah,
starts what?
Lancaster.
Lancaster, thank you, thank you. Names go first, you've got to be understanding. So that whole end of the route is very much in doubt, and yet that is part of the initial route that the authority has identified for their service, and they don't know how to do it yet. But those are the basic issues, and as Mike indicated, we're hoping that will go to trial in the summer, or certainly no later than in the fall. But that is moving along. We hope well. The next item is the litigation that you all received, that Mike Brady has proposed. He's here to answer questions about that. I trust that we have all read it. It's a little bit different from what we had in mind, and I would like, Mike, if you would initially tell us the basis on which you decided to file suit against High Speed Rail instead of Caltrain, as we had discussed earlier.
Now, first of all, just to focus on a timeline that I hope we can achieve. The plan would be for this committee to approve the concept of the lawsuit for violation of Proposition 1A and other violations. And then there is time, if we approve it tonight, there is time, we can get it in final form, and incidentally, it has typos in it, and some grammatical mistakes. Everything is going to be put into proper form by Thursday morning, and then get it through Teresa to the council so that they can have it on the agenda. And again, I'm told there is time. Have it on the agenda for Wednesday, April 15th. And they can consider and decide whether to approve it after this committee hopefully recommends it. We followed this procedure before in November, last November, where we recommended the Atherton lawsuit challenging the EIR. At that time, we also discussed at length this particular lawsuit. And it was decided by this group that we would be burdening the council with too much stuff if we tried to get them to approve an environmental challenge and a Proposition 1A suit. So we decided, or you decided, to wait on the Prop 1A. Eventually, after reconsideration, the council did approve the Atherton environmental challenge consider the filing of the Proposition 1A suit. Now, if you approve and if the council approves, it would be my intention for 2 weeks thereafter, after the applicant council approves, to try to get Palo Alto to join the suit. We present it as a package. Here it is. It's all done. It's all approved. Do you want to join us? I think there's a fairly good chance that they would say yes. Menlo Park, maybe, but I'm not nearly as optimistic about Menlo Park. So that's what I'm talking about, a timeline. Sort of a quick timeline, but it's a good idea, I think, to move things along. Now, the focus of the lawsuit. One of the things, first of all, the people that are involved in the lawsuit are yourself, Atherton, TransDeaf, a group presided over by David Schoenberg, who's been active in the battle for high-speed rail for years, and CCHSR, whose president is Jim Chance, I'm a board member, and then Tony Wynn, one of your residents, who lives on the tracks down the way. He's the individual plaintiff. So 4 people. And I've had input concerning this lawsuit from about 12 people representing Atherton, and Tony, and CCHSR, and TransDeaf. So there's been plenty of input. One of the things that everybody on the peninsula is concerned about is a frontal assault on Caltrain and a frontal assault opposing electrification. That's what nobody seems to want. And can you accomplish your goals of preventing high-speed rail from coming to the peninsula without such a frontal assault? Now, one of the ways that the complaint has been drafted is to say that the High-Speed Rail Authority is in charge of everything, that the Caltrain electrification project is an integral part of the entire statewide high-speed rail project. Integral and essential part, and that high-speed rail has ultimate authority over everything and has special agreements and everything. So we have limited the complaint to a lawsuit not against Caltrain, but against the High-Speed Rail Authority, alleging that they're going to try to use Prop 1A funds and other funds, public funds, to construct this, and that it's all illegal for various reasons. So that's one of the important things to have in mind. But we're alleging that the electrification project is part and parcel of a statewide high-speed rail project over which the High-Speed Rail Authority has ultimate control, including control over what Caltrain does. So we'll see whether we can carry that off. But that is a strategy in this lawsuit. That is a strategy that I think makes the lawsuit more palatable to the residents of the peninsula, so they don't say, "Oh my God, I don't want to kill electrification." You know, it's to keep high-speed rail off the peninsula. The same people who say they want electrification also don't want high-speed rail. So you see the dilemma. This dilemma we faced from the beginning. So how do we meet the dilemma? I think we've made it, or we'll be able to meet it. Now I can discuss very briefly the particular claims. The first claim is a claim that the project violates Proposition 1A because there never was any funding plan submitted for the Peninsula project, and that is true. There was a funding plan submitted by the Authority for the Central Valley project, but the Peninsula project was an afterthought by the legislature, and by the time they got around to appropriating $600 million for the Peninsula, there was no funding plans ever submitted by the Authority. It was non-existent, but they went ahead and approved it. So the allegation of the first claim is that the appropriation of 600 million made by the legislature is invalid because it has to have a funding plan before the appropriation can take place. And if the court were to agree with that, it would mean the project is simply can't go ahead at all because they can't get access to any 600 million. The 600 million just doesn't exist. They have to go all through the whole procedure of getting a funding plan, having a new meeting of the legislature, reapproving it. Things have changed, public opinion has turned against the project, and I don't know whether they would be able to get that.
If any of you remember, the money that was appropriated by the legislature to fund this was a last-minute panic put together just in the 1st of July 2013, wasn't it, Mike?
2012,
Was it 2012? Was it that long
July
ago?
2012.
My goodness. The bill was presented to both houses of the legislature on the day that it was passed. It was the last day of the session, and it was just jammed through. And it was quite apparent then, and has been since, that nobody really paid much attention to what was in it. But it was a lifesaver for high-speed rail to keep it moving. And in doing this, they violated the law in some rather important respects.
Who was behind that bill?
Who was behind which bill?
The appropriation
The
bill.
appropriation of 600 million.
2/3 of the members of the legislature.
No, somebody must
Our
have
beloved
sponsored it.
governor.
Somebody must have sponsored it to start with, don't they?
Oh, wow.
Don't these bills get initiated by an individual member of the legislature?
Isn't it Hill? I thought it was.
No.
I can't even remember who.
Probably Jerry Hill, but I don't
I
know.
think it was Joe Simidian and,
Lowenthal?
and Esham. The members, some other
Oh,
people
she's
involved
in
behind
the-
it. I know, of course, but she was still behind the idea.
She was
Oh.
part of the triumvirate that was
Yeah.
sponsoring the blended system, that's right.
Well, I
Well,
think
Rich
Jack's
Gordon probably.
asking what
Yes,
members
Rich
of the
Gordon.
Rich
legislature
Gordon.
are being
That as
ordered
well.
bill.
Right,
That's right, Rich Gordon, Joe Simidian, and that's
And
enough.
an issue.
and Esham.
Well, issues, that's
she's-
federal.
Well, that's right, but she was a sponsor of that activity.
Then there are.
Is there
Go
a
ahead.
bill number that we can look up and read?
1029, is that right?
Yes.
Is it
SB 1029.
SB 1029
Senate Bill 1029,
of 2012?
July 6, 2012. I was sitting in the clerk's office waiting to file the lawsuit. And filed it within a minute after they passed legislation. So the next three claims are claims that are common to the TOS claim. The trip time, they can't make the 2 hours and 40 minutes.
The TOS case
the
is
s-
the Central Valley case.
The, no subsidy allowed, we say that the project is going to require state, local, or federal subsidy. And, the blended system in and of itself violates Prop 1A. Prop 1A says nothing about the blended system, nothing. Proposition 1A requires the project to be consistent with the 2008 federal EIS. I'm sorry, with the environmental statements of 2008. Those statements require that there be dedicated tracks for high-speed rail. No blended system is mentioned, no sharing of tracks. So after the law was passed, Jack, the authority on its own unilaterally decides we're gonna have a blended system. The legislature never approved that, and it violates the original Proposition 1A. So, that's the third claim that is similar to the Central Valley, and Atherton has the right to make these claims as well. Now, the next claim is a unique one that you probably have not heard of, but it's very interesting and I think advantageous particularly from a PR standpoint. Since the year 2008, the authority has never told us what the statewide system will cost. The statewide system consists of Phase 1 and 2. Phase 1 goes from San Francisco to Anaheim. Phase 2 includes San Diego, the Inland Empire, San Bernardino area, Sacramento, and Oakland. So Phase 2 is very important. It's quite large. Serves a lot of people. But since 2008, there has only been one representation as to what the statewide cost will be, and that's $45 billion. Complete silence from the authority after that. And we found a provision in the Public Utilities Code, which says that the authority, every time they do a business plan or a report to the legislature, is supposed to tell them what the updated costs of the statewide system are, and every segment thereof. So what has the authority done for the last 6 years? Every time they make an estimate, they limit themselves to Phase 1, San Francisco to Los Angeles or Anaheim. They completely ignore the rest of the system. What is the statewide system cost? My guess is 150 to 200 billion. But all you're seeing from the authority is 68 billion, which they said 2.5 years ago Phase 1 would cost. They've never even updated that figure. How much is that figure now for San Francisco to LA? Wouldn't be surprised if it's more than $100 billion, but they won't even update that. So this claim in the lawsuit says, Mr. Judge or Ms. Judge, make them amend the 2015 business plan submitted in, the 2014 business plan submitted in April of 2014, make them amended and tell the people of California and the legislature what the costs for the statewide system are, including every segment thereof. It's a potential source, I think, of great embarrassment to the authority to have to disclose these costs to everybody in California. What is the voter going to think if they see $150 billion compared to 68? So that's what that claim. And that's a new claim. That's never been asserted before.
Excuse me, it sounds as though that claim is not necessarily, and part of this 5 goes beyond Prop 1A, that we should be challenging both Prop 1A and these other provisions of the public utilities law or regulations.
Well, you raise a good point. The complaint raises matters that are germane to the high-speed rail project that are not strictly covered by Proposition 1A, but that is legitimate to do. You can bring all claims that have some relationship to the project. But in answer to your question, I believe this Public Utilities Code section is part of Proposition 1A. It refers to what they have to do regarding telling the legislature and the people what the cost of Proposition 1A project is. This is a Proposition 1A project. They have to tell the voters what the cost of that is. So that part is directly related.
Would it do any harm to make the challenge broader than Proposition 1A?
We're making a broader challenge.
Rather than say, we assume that these things are implied in Proposition 1A, and in order to comply with
No,
1A.
the wording in the suit, Jack, does not tie it to Proposition 1A, it ties it to the Public Utility Code. So that has actually been done.
But it's not necessary for any of these claims to be tied directly to Prop 1A. That's my point. The next claim is called Headway. This is not a claim in the TOS case, but it clearly is a violation. Proposition 1A, I don't want to get into too much specifics, but Proposition 1A in essence requires that there be 10 trains per hour.
12,
12 trains per hour. And what is it?
leaving the Transbay
Yeah,
terminal.
4 high-speed rail trains, and is it 4 or 5? And 7 Caltrain commuter trains?
No, the 12 trains were high-speed rail trains.
Okay.
That's the requirement there.
An hour?
An hour, yeah, 5-minute departures.
And is that in each direction?
Well,
Total of
no, that's 12 departing trains.
From
Oh,
San
San
Francisco?
Well, you have 12 arriving trains, so you've got
And
nothing.
12 departing from Los Angeles,
Well,
maybe?
Yeah, in order to satisfy their huge estimates of patronage on the system so that they could make it pay, they set up a level of service that represented 12 trains an hour out of the Transbay terminal. They initially designed the terminal, you may recall, Jack, for 12 platforms for high-speed rail and 6 platforms for Caltrain. And now they're having 6 platforms total.
But I think there's a difference between 12 trains per hour implying that's in both directions and there are 6 in each direction,
No,
rather than saying there are 12 trains per hour in each direction.
that's 12 departures per hour from the station. There would also be 12 arrivals per hour in the
Okay.
station. It's a dead-end
Yeah.
turnaround station.
Now, as a practical matter, this was probably a ridiculous provision to put into Proposition 1A, but it clearly is there. So why not take advantage of it? It says this, it's a mandatory requirement. They're not going to be able to fulfill it. So if we allege that it has been violated, the court would probably have to say you're in violation of Proposition 1A. From everything I've heard, the Transbay terminal is not even being constructed to be able to handle 12 high-speed rail trains per hour. But that's their own problem, that they didn't do this thing right. And they're in violation, and so that's what that claim is all about. It's called
Even
the
without,
headway claim.
even without the 12, the Transbay terminal, the blended system can't handle 12 trains
No,
per hour in each
That's a
direction.
major, this is what Quentin Kopp said.
Whether you
Is
go
that
to
what
the Transbay terminal or not.
Well,
Well,
Quentin Kopp says, when they adopted the blended system, this emasculated the goals of Proposition 1A, making the goals impossible. Because with the blended system, you destroy the ability to meet the headway requirement. Without the headway requirement, according to Kopp, the system cannot be profitable and you won't have the ridership that you need. So that's why he says that this is a blended system, bastardizes the entire system and wrecks it, and it should never have been violated, and it's a central reason why Proposition 1A has been violated. That's according to him.
And if you recall, Quentin Kopp was chairman of the High-Speed Rail Authority initially. So
And
he has turned on.
the next claim is also rather unique. It hasn't been alleged before. In 2008, there was a NEPA. That's a federal environmental report or statement. That was done before Proposition 1A was crafted by the legislature and submitted to the voters. Before. So the federal environmental report could take no knowledge, or it could not have been written with the knowledge that high-speed rail was going to be brought to California and would be part of the peninsula, and that the Peninsula Project would be an integral part of the high-speed rail system. So the federal environmental report just analyzes the California Peninsula Electrification Project in the abstract, as if it's not part of anything except standalone. It's just there by itself. So then Proposition 1A is passed, and suddenly the Caltrain Electrification Project becomes part of a statewide system. But the federal government and the environmental people never analyzed that. So what we say in this particular claim is, you need a new federal environmental impact study, because now the project is part of the statewide high-speed rail system. You never analyzed that in your last report, which was 2008. So go back and do it. And why does this violate Proposition 1A? Because Proposition 1A says all environmental clearances have to be obtained before you can start the project. So we say, well, they may have gotten the CEQA clearance a couple of months ago, but we need a new federal clearance. You got to get the federal clearances as well, and the old one is outdated and needs to be updated to take account of this fact. Now, there is also a claim in this lawsuit that they never got the permission, the authority never got the permission of the Union Pacific Railway to do the project. As you know, no modification or alteration of the Peninsula Corridor can be made by anyone unless Union Pacific gives its consent in writing. They have total control over this. They can veto the project totally, or they can set conditions on it. But as we sit here tonight, the Union Pacific Railway has not given its consent, and indeed has objected to the project. And that's in progress. There are hearings going on with the Public Utilities Commission, etc. Union Pacific is not crazy about this project. So they do not have the written consent. Now, this part of the claim is not strictly part of Proposition 1A, but there's no reason why the court should not hear it, and why the court could not decide that before any work starts on the peninsula, they have to get the permission of Union Pacific in writing for the work. They have to sign off on it. And so long as Union Pacific doesn't give that consent, the project can't start. So I do not see this claim as being forbidden just because most of the claim is for violation of Prop 1A. It's a separate violation that certainly relates to this whole thing, because Union Pacific has control, Proposition 1A or not, over anything that's done on this particular corridor. Now, the last claim is also unique. It's been touched upon by Paul. We say that in September of 2013, the authority had an expert, nationally known engineering firm called URS. And they fired them. And you know why they fired them? Because they issued a report in September 2013 that said, you don't have a viable route to get from Bakersfield to Palmdale, because you can't go over these mountains. The gradient's too, it creates all sorts of problems. So that is not a physically viable route. They have to go through Palmdale. So we say, as of today, as of the filing date of the complaint, you have no viable route for half of the distance from Northern California, or from San Francisco to Los Angeles. You have come up with no alternative plan. You have no alternate route. And therefore, Mr. or Ms. Judge, don't let them commence the project at all. That's what
Doesn't
that
that
says.
tie in with the 2 hours and 40 minutes as well?
It certainly does, but it's different because we think that the court will allow a challenge if there's no viable route, and that no project should be allowed to go ahead until they have a viable route to get to Southern California. You can't start it up here and then have nothing to get over the mountains to Southern California. And they've had a year and a half now to develop an alternate route, and what have they done? Nothing. And they fired the consultants that told them they had a real problem. So it doesn't look good. And we have that report, and it will undoubtedly be entered into evidence during the trial. That's a report dated
That's when you were asking about that.
September
Yeah,
2013.
I sent an email to Rita, but got no answer.
Yeah. So this is this is an outline then of the claims, and so I guess the matter for Paul to place before you is whether to approve this and recommend it to the council. Last time around, your recommendation, I think, sort of carried the day when we made the pitch. First of all, remember the council didn't approve the environmental suit. And we came back and said, look, this committee, which has been in existence for more than a decade and who has highly qualified experts on it who know a lot about railroads, studied this matter for many, many months and made a recommendation. Of course, you studied the matter that we're talking about tonight for well over a year. I've been to many of the meetings, and I think politically as well, this is will be a much less controversial lawsuit than the environmental challenge. And also, as I've told you before, I'll do this free of charge. I will not charge you anything except the cost of suit, which in a case like this would be very minimal. So that's in essence. I'm available to answer any questions anybody has.
Would it be wise to not bring in these claims that are not directly related to 1A?
No, I think it's wise to bring them. Let's get them adjudicated. They're in our favor. I think you should bring every claim that is in your favor related to the project. The UPRR claim is related to the project. The non-viable Southern California route is related to the project. I think it's very important to bring those. The UPRR is a very strong claim, I think.
Even those that duplicate the TOS?
No, it is not in the TOS case, Jack.
No, but I thought you said that
Some of the claims.
2, 3, and 4 were
Some of the-
duplicates of the TOS
Yeah.
case.
But you have the right to bring those.
Okay.
That gives you a second bite at the apple. What if we lose the TOS case? That's not binding on Atherton. Atherton can relitigate that issue. Don't just accept the TOS case and say you'll live with that when you have the right to litigate some of the same issues in the TOS case. You're giving up an advantage if you did that.
I'm sorry,
Ellen?
I'm the newest member here and I have very little history. Although I did watch the December tape of your meeting. Couldn't find the February one, but in any case. So just trying to understand who everybody is. Are you, Mike, a member of this committee?
No, I don't even live in Atherton. I live in Menlo Park.
Oh, okay.
And I'm an attorney.
Have we hired you as our,
Nobody's hired me because I'm working for free.
okay, are you working for free for the town?
Yes,
Okay, so are you doing the EIR lawsuit?
No, I'm not involved in that. I'm not an environmental attorney. But I've been coming to the rail committee meeting for years because I've been fighting against the high-speed rail project on the peninsula since 2005. 10 years. Along with many people from Atherton, Menlo Park, and so forth, volunteers.
Okay, thanks.
But I've never charged anything for any of my work. And Atherton, of all the peninsula towns, has been the only one that has been steadfast and forthright and stuck to its guns. Everybody else wavers, can't make up their mind. So that's why I like Atherton.
You should move here.
Is there any chance Burlingame would be a party to
I
the
don't
suit?
think so. Burlingame Council has changed.
They've changed?
Yes, the mood up there has changed. I still am somewhat optimistic that if we present this as a package that's been approved by Atherton, that Palo Alto might join. I talked to two of the newly elected city councilmen for Palo Alto a couple of months ago. Jen and I did, in fact, and they seem to like the Proposition 1A lawsuit better than an environmental lawsuit.
Mm-hmm.
It's too bad
bad Menlo Park isn't. I like the idea of a block, a
I
geographic
know,
block.
yeah, wouldn't that be nice? Well, I'll certainly present it to Menlo Park. And
Almost surely Redwood City would not.
a lot of times
Mm.
municipalities have concerns about costs, and of course, if they're told they're not gonna have to pay attorney fees, and that the legal costs are gonna be very small, which they would be, then it sort of removes that objection. Then the only objection you have is, like from a council person that might be in league with the high-speed rail and say, oh, I don't wanna do anything. I want high-speed rail, but
Right.
they don't have the courage to come out and tell the voters that. So that's what you might, a political decision, in other words, that's what you might run across. But the environmental things, your council was concerned with the costs,
Yeah.
and that was the reason why there was initially opposition from the Atherton Town Council. And then Stuart Flashman made a special arrangement, capped his fees at a very low amount, and I think that probably carried the day with Atherton, that he was going to represent them at a fixed cost.
So have we considered, just thinking about our neighboring cities, have we had discussions about this lawsuit with them?
There have been long discussions. There was an organization called the Peninsula Cities Consortium, consisting of Brisbane, Burlingame, Belmont, Atherton, Menlo Park, Palo Alto, that had monthly and then quarterly meetings trying to deal with the high-speed rail situation. That fairly focused peninsula effort has largely dissolved as one town after another succumbed to the romance of electrification and other things. I'm not sure why they did it. I don't understand it, but
Well, the
this has
Atherton
happened.
Council member initially, I think, was the organizer of it. And when he stepped down from the council, I think that lost some of the impetus.
I think Mike's, I'm just gonna interject just a little bit. I think Mike's really got the little nut. Electrification is sold to so many of the communities in the peninsula. And going against electrification is like going against saving water. It is really like.
You really hit us how it hurts, don't you?
And it's like you're talking against electrification and electric cars, and now you're talking against it's like you're talking against water right now. So cities are they may be opposed to HSR. There's two things going on parallel, as Mike's identifying, that are creating confusion even with the voters. They may be in fact in favor of electrification, but they don't want anything to do with high-speed rail. The city councils along the peninsula, including Palo Alto, may be very much in favor of electrification, but they may not be in favor of HSR. And now you have new people at Palo Alto that may have a little bit of a different opinion, willing to stick their necks out a little further and saying, hey, wait a minute, I might be in favor of electrification, but I'm surely not in favor of HSR. So there's maybe some roadway there. So it's
Palo Alto had an election in November of last year, and the council became more anti-high-speed rail. I can't represent to you that it would get that this lawsuit would get a majority vote to join Atherton, but it would be more favorable than the old council.
Is Pat Burt still on the council?
yes,
Yes,
but he's not the representative for rail anymore.
no, and he's not mayor anymore. either.
Right.
Yeah.
And to answer your question, the other city, Menlo Park, has always been very weak. It just can't make a decision. And they've got some very pro-HSR people on it.
Rich Klein's the only pro left, isn't he?
Pro or anti-Rich?
Anti.
He's
Rich
pro, he would be pro joining the suit.
Oh, yeah.
Probably, yeah. But they got a little bit excited over the environmental challenge, but ultimately didn't join, nor did Palo Alto.
Doesn't cost anything to, time or motion to present it to them though, right?
No.
And you'll ask.
Of course, yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
But I'd love to do it after, it's like Atherton has put its final seal of approval, and we just go to them and said, look, we haven't filed this yet, we'd like to file this in 2 weeks in court. So would you put it on your agenda and talk about it and see whether you'd like to join us. It won't cost you anything either. It's better than saying, well, we're debating it.
Oh, yeah.
They see you're determined to go ahead, that'll help, I think, push it in our favor if they're inclined to do so. That's the politics behind it.
Do we have any knowledge of when their city council meets again?
I don't.
Palo Alto's?
I don't. I can find out though.
I think they meet more often than monthly.
Every other.
Every other week.
I've always had the feeling that Union Pacific is sitting back waiting for somebody else to do their dirty work.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's exactly right.
And
they,
is there any chance that they would join the lawsuit?
no, Union Pacific
They'd applaud
is,
it, but they wouldn't
Yeah.
join it.
Union Pacific is the biggest landowner in the United States. Second to the federal government. And they have to be very political and not alienate the powers that be in Washington where they're regulated. So they like to sit back and wait for other people to do their dirty work. And then if all else failed, what would they do if they were steering high-speed rail, interfering with their freight operations from San Jose to San Francisco? Would they veto it, which they could do? I don't know. Could they be bought off for a couple of $1 billion to give up their freight operations? I don't know. It's happened before.
And they usually have people in, and they're at the LPMG, they're always in attendance. They don't say much, but they're always watching, so I think Mike's probably good.
We know, I know enough, having worked on this for a dozen years, to know that freight railroads hate high-speed rail. They hate it because it seriously would interfere with their operations. But they can't say they hate it. But you talk to people who work for them, and they tell you that they don't like it.
I did a lot of work with the Union Pacific years ago, and they were pretty stern in their views. But the people that I dealt with are no longer there, so I have no idea how the current officers would react.
Can I just say one thing? In the past, I believe that Union Pacific cited safety concerns as one of their reasons for objecting to it. And I would think that would be a tougher thing to back away from once they put that out there than any other concerns in terms of interfering with the freight service, whatever. Once they put safety out there, how do you back away or get bought off on that?
No, they have raised the issue of electromagnetic interference with their train control system, which is a safety factor.
Right.
Are there other comments?
I guess
Ellen.
sorry, I have a
No,
lot of
it's okay.
questions. Is there a reason to, other than trying to move forward as quickly as possible, and I understand that, sooner is generally better than later, is there any calendaring or any outside timing that's affecting the timing of this?
There is not, we had a time limit on the environmental suit.
Right.
It had to be filed within 30 days of the approval of the environmental report by the Joint Powers Board. So that was under a time gun. This is not, but I think it's ready to go. I think it would be, we would lose more than we would gain by delaying it at this point. That's my personal view.
This would be part of a statewide strategy to create hurdles for the project to go forward on a statewide basis. We're all against the project going forward on a statewide basis because it's foolish and waste.
I don't agree with that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm there yet on that kind of conclusion either. So that's why
I'm just being candid with you that if you file the lawsuit, well, first of all, the lawsuit is quite legitimate. There are real reasons why it should not go on the peninsula, real legal reasons, and why we don't want these communities to be damaged by high-speed rail, or people to lose their property or have the trees all cut down and so forth. So those are all our personal reasons on the peninsula. But as part of an overall strategy, there's lots of lawsuits going on, environmental lawsuits, the Central Valley lawsuit, other lawsuits. This would be another lawsuit the authority would have to deal with it, and deal with it in the context of the statewide project. So whether it helps or not in that end game, I don't know, but certainly there's enough reasons for peninsula people to want to protect their own interests, and for Atherton especially.
Probably the most urgent reason for moving forward promptly is that the Joint Powers Board is moving ahead on their electrification project just as quickly as they can. And that is the camel's head to get high-speed rail on the peninsula, so it's in our interest to stop that before it gets too far advanced.
So is it reasonable to say, I'm sorry, that, I mean, because you're new, I'm gonna say this, and it's gonna sound a little like planting a tree. The basis for the lawsuits and complaints is primarily because the perception on a lot of people is that the voters were deceived. When we gave Sacramento the approval to do a train, they were deceived on what we believed we were voting in, and because now it seems that nothing we were agreeing to, the voting in, is now changed. The fact of the matter is the train's not gonna be here when you say the funding's gonna be subsidized. There's a lot of reasons where a lawsuit would be applicable. Now the voters are unaware. They've seemed to have voted and said yes because we believed all the things that Sacramento sold us, and that's why the grounds for a lot of suits, or our suits in general, are because of the fact that the people of California were deceived on what they were voting in, because now everything's changed. They said, hey, don't worry about it, we'll deal with it later. Well, no, they should be dealing with it before they start spending our tax dollars. And I think that that's the original concept. It goes back to when the seed was planted and we voted yes.
Yeah, I mean, to echo his sentiments, what people vote for is kind of probably unrealistic. Well, not unrealistic, but I feel like what we vote for should matter, right? And you know, I'm old enough to remember what I voted on, and the law was pretty clear on what we were going to vote for and what was supposed to be delivered. And I think it's very reasonable for people to expect to get what they voted for, especially when it comes with huge financial consequences. I think for me personally, it's not just about what I voted for isn't what I'm getting, it's what as a taxpayer I was expected to pay. I'm expected to pay much more for much less. And I think it's reasonable to say, if you want high-speed rail, you should, or actually, to me, I've always looked at it as, if you want to use Prop 1A funds, you have to meet the guidelines of Prop 1A. Like, you can actually even say, I'm pro high-speed rail, but if you want to do high-speed rail with any money from Prop 1A, you got to follow Prop 1A. There's nothing technically stopping the legislature from taking money from the general fund. I mean, it would crush our budget, but it's not like we're holding it's not like we're holding the state hostage. We're just saying, here's Prop 1A, here's the rules required to access that money. We expect you to follow those rules.
Prove it.
Yeah, that's.
And if you prove it to me, I'll still be in favor of it.
Yeah,
But if
actually,
you can't prove it to me,
yeah.
a lawsuit that itemizes all the items you're not willing to
Yeah.
provide, then in fact it should stop. And
Yeah.
that, I think, is just
Yeah.
the nature of why our lawsuit, and it may be problematic because people believe that everybody in Atherton is anti-everything. No, we want you to follow what the voters voted for. I mean, bottom line, period. And if you can't meet that obligation, if Sacramento or a judge cannot make that decision, or force the high-speed rail authority to prove it, then there's a problem with the system that we're voting in. And I think that's the
Yeah.
big picture. Then we've got a bigger problem, and ignorance to follow the law shouldn't be a reason why we have to file a suit. They should already have done this. And we shouldn't be forced to file a lawsuit just to get what the voters already believe is there. Simple.
Let me point out one thing if I could. We've been advised by our city attorney that to avoid conflicts of interest, anybody on this committee that lives within 500 feet
500 feet.
of the railroad tracks should not participate in voting on any action that's taken here to make a recommendation to the city council. I think it's dumb because for a project, a statewide project this big, it seems to me our little tiny personal impact is de minimis, but that's what we've been told, and that's why Rosemary and I both live within 500 feet, and will not vote on this.
No,
I-
500.
I'm not
Don't
sure,
very much.
actually. I always thought it was like somewhere under, like around 200 feet or something.
It's
I'm actually not
500.
close.
Yeah, 500. 500. You can ask Charlie Girls.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to get in my car and drive up and down Walnut, trying to figure out if I'm
Get your
500.
pedometer.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
gonna say you can use this new.
Yeah, I'm probably borderline, which,
Just to back up his comment about Caltrain moving and JPB moving forward on this, the Hort Science people have, I don't know how far they've gone. I know they've gone from probably our northern border on the right-of-way. Hort Science, for anybody who doesn't know, is the arborist, is the tree company that Caltrain uses to assess the condition of the trees along their right-of-way that will be either cut down, severely pruned, or pruned for electrification, i.e. a part of high-speed rail. But they have already done our central part of Atherton about 2 or 3 weeks ago. Do you know that?
No.
And they don't, that's typical, they don't communicate with the towns.
Well, one of the things I need to jump in and say is that per what Jim says in the city attorney's advice, I don't even think that not only voting, but also participating in the discussion,
Correct, I agree with that.
so.
You mean I shouldn't have said that the trees have been marked?
You shouldn't participate in this discussion.
Well, I'll go home.
I guess I have a bunch of more questions if that's.
well, you should
okay.
ask, and also, if you don't feel comfortable voting in a particular
Yeah.
direction, then, I mean, you're,
No, I
there's absolutely no
understand.
peer pressure.
Understood,
Yeah,
thank you, I
understood.
appreciate that. I guess I was trying, so I've only been trying over the last week or so to get myself up to speed, so I apologize for asking some questions that people may know the answer to. It seemed like there was a Prop 1A lawsuit that was decided unfavorably to the plaintiffs sometimes at the end of the fall or early
No,
winter last
the,
year.
the lawsuit that you're referring to is the appellate court hearing on the Central Valley lawsuit. That was ruled in favor of the plaintiffs in December by the Superior Court in Sacramento. And the appellate court said, did not contradict any of the findings of the Superior Court, but said that inasmuch as no bond money has yet been spent, there has been no damage.
Oh, okay.
And so the opportunity to go back to the appellate court and say, hey, they've now spent some money, still exists.
Oh, so they were saying it just wasn't right?
So they took a,
It was premature.
they took a very light touch. The authority claimed more of a victory there than they actually
Oh,
realized.
okay,
Yeah.
understood, okay, thanks.
Are we about to vote?
Well, are we ready to vote?
I want to make a comment before that.
I'd like to hear your comment.
All right, I generally support high-speed rail, and I always have. My position has been, if you do it right, I would support it. But the position I have is they're not doing it right. And what I mean by doing it right is to put it in a trench where it would not impact any of the environmental concerns that we have, and it would eliminate the safety hazards on the peninsula. That is what's doing it right. They're not doing that, therefore I will vote for the lawsuit.
Okay, I agree with you completely, Greg.
Yeah, me too.
As I've told all of you several times, I worked on 3 high-speed rail projects, and I believe that under the proper circumstances, it's a very effective form of transportation, but this is not it.
Well, it could be.
It could be, but it's not. It was
Right.
designed by politicians, and the engineers have allied themselves with the politicians to give them what they want, which I think is a disgrace for the engineering profession.
Well, I think
That's my personal view.
There are really, things coming to a head after we get through this agenda item. There's a comments from the committee, I will discuss what's going on at the last Caltrain's meeting, and I think things are coming to a head that it's gonna force them to do some stuff that would make it more palatable to our desires.
Okay. Do we have a motion on the floor to recommend that the council take action on this suit as filed?
So moved.
Second?
Not only take action, but approve.
Approve.
Well, they have to approve, right, ultimately,
They-
but this is, we're making a
Yeah, they have to.
recommendation.
We're recommending that they move forward with the suit.
Yes.
It's a recommendation to the council.
That's correct. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. We're ready to vote? All in favor, raise your hands. Opposed? No?
I'm gonna abstain.
Okay, we have abstentions. We have 3 abstentions. We have a unanimous.
Did you call for abstentions?
Well, we have those who are not allowed to participate in
Well,
this.
there's others who did not.
Just,
vote.
just
Just
Ellen.
one.
Ellen is the only
Don't you vote?
I
abstention.
don't vote.
Carrie doesn't have a vote.
You don't have a vote.
He's only a council member. He doesn't really count.
I'm just.
He gets
here.
the next,
I'm just.
he gets the next one.
I like it, Jill, I like it.
Well, she could
Oh,
vote.
you can't vote
I
either?
can't.
Okay.
Did she?
I
Right.
can't vote.
No, she can't vote.
Why not?
She's-
I live too close.
Too
I'm
close
sure I
proximity.
live within
So we got 4 people that live within 500 feet,
Yeah.
and you're
Well,
not sure you can vote.
I'm not abstaining for
I'm
that reason.
pretty
I'm
sure I'm
sure
looking
they
at it.
look, I'm sure they look.
Do you remember where my house is? You
Yeah,
visited it.
believe me, anybody that's on rail, the city attorney looks right where their parcel is
Okay.
and says, okay, how many?
Like,
feet?
I'm much closer.
You're probably
to Alpena.
504 feet.
I'm 3 houses,
Sure
so
you-
there's 2 houses between me and Alpena.
Well,
So I'm much, much, much closer to Alpena.
I was.
So let the record show that 3 of us are abstaining.
3 of us.
Marissa Dexter, Murray Wallish, and myself.
I would appreciate calling the roll.
You wanna call a roll?
Yeah, so we have a record of the vote.
Okay.
Just say something, Carrie is
Would
saying
you call a roll,
that anybody
Mike?
who would be on
It's
It's probably a good
the committee
idea.
would have been vetted for being beyond
They would-
500 feet. Do you think that is correct, Jim?
I think that when Jerry Carlson had the situation where they were measuring distance, they went through it, and I think they probably looked at everybody in rail at that time
Yeah.
to make sure that everybody was within the legal
Okay. And he
requirements.
never
So-
said anything to me. so-
Or knew that they weren't.
It's
That
never
was-
happened.
But it would be simple,
Oh,
the
was that
next
recording?
line to check
Okay.
was, George and see, if it was done.
All right, Greg has called for a canvass of the committee.
Okay, Member Lively,
Aye.
Member Conlon,
Aye.
Member Jones,
Aye.
Member Lane,
Aye.
Member Jameson.
Abstain.
And Member Ringham.
Aye.
Okay, I think I got everybody.
And
That's
note
eligible.
that 3 committee members recused themselves from the discussion.
Do we have a majority?
You have 4.
How many are present?
Just has to be a majority of those voting, doesn't it?
We have a unanimous vote. No, we
No,
have,
flip around.
Yeah.
Well, it's gotta be a majority of those present.
No.
No, if they
can
can't
vote,
vote,
Majority of
this
those
is
voting.
not very important member.
we've got
So
five
since you can't
votes,
include Jim,
5
those
aye
are
votes.
considered counting members.
Bill,
They can't-
Greg, Scott,
You sure?
So that
Stack,
you're
me,
considering the
that's
vote
5.
needed?
No, I'm just saying.
We
that
have
you need a
1
quorum. You
abstention
need a majority of a quorum.
and 3 recusing themselves.
So this is all the rail committee members, so we'd never be able to pass it under your law.
Well, no, I don't know. I think we have enough.
Yeah, but I'm
How
saying.
many members do we have
We have 10 members.
that are present?
No.
Yeah.
Malcolm's
2,
not
3,
here.
4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We have 9 members present.
9 members, and how many vote? We have 5, so we
5
have,
voted.
Five.
5 voted. 4.
so that's a majority.
Yeah, that's a majority.
So even if, under my
You do
concern,
large, yeah,
it's still,
it'd still be good.
so it's good. It's 5 out of 9 at worst case. Best case, it's 5 out of 5
Right.
No, it's 5 out of 6. We
Five
have
out
to
of 6,
count
yeah, 5
Ellen
out
as
of
an
6.
abstention.
with 3 abstentions.
No, with 3 recuses.
You
Uses.
go.
That's
One
different.
abstention.
All right.
That's right.
Okay,
I'm abstaining from
so,
being told.
Right, she would vote.
Mike, you will present this to the city manager and,
Yes, I will send an email to the city manager tonight. He was aware this was on the agenda, so a placeholder for next week's closed session has already been put on the, council
Good.
agenda.
good. And you will have a smooth copy
Yeah,
to, Teresa or to Mike.
by
Yeah.
Thursday.
By
Yeah, it's
Thursday.
best to send it to Teresa, just directly to Teresa, and she'll.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's fine. Okay, well that,
Can that be distributed to us, the
Yeah,
final?
yeah, I'm sure.
Sure, I'll be happy to send it to you.
no, let
No,
Teresa send it
Teresa.
to us.
Yeah.
Don't you send it to us.
No,
Yeah.
no. I'll ask Teresa to send it to you, to the council, to the city manager, and to the city attorney.
Okay, that's fine, and she'll do what she knows
Yes.
is best.
Well, somebody should send it to us once it's in final
Yeah.
form, so we know what we voted for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be coming from Teresa.
From staff.
Know who we voted for.
Okay, that,
Before the vote or after?
It'll be going to you, prior to closed session.
the next item on the agenda tonight is the holdout rule design alternatives. At our meeting last week, we were given, or last meeting 2 months ago, February meeting, we were given some suggested holdout designs by Caltrain. And the designs generally showed that the track spacing would remain the same as it is now, even if they eliminate the holdout design. And yet, when you look at their 3-track alternatives, they were bringing the tracks closer together in order to fit a 3rd track in there. Now, it is my feeling, personally, that if they're going to eliminate the holdout rule, they should bring the tracks closer together so that we can cut down on the number of trees that are damaged by the electrification project,
Even if there's only 2 tracks?
even if there are only 2 tracks.
Well, yeah, so
They-
that's what
they-
you're saying, if there's
They
2
can be closer,
tracks.
they should be brought close together to use a smaller fraction of the right of way. Nurse?
May I ask
Yes,
a question?
please.
Okay. How would that impact the possibility of just having 1 arm instead of 2 arms?
It would impact it very significantly. It would bring the tracks about 6 feet closer together.
So it would eliminate the possibility of 1 arm instead of 2?
No, it would make it possible to have 1
Oh,
arm,
it would make it possible?
Make
Yeah.
it less
Make
costly.
it easier.
less
Okay,
costly.
I
What do you mean,
understand.
one arm of?
To
Talking about
support-
quad gates or?
To support the
no.
wires.
No.
Arm to support.
Thanks.
Yeah, there is support.
Yeah, there you
To
are.
be in the middle, rather than 2 poles
The overhead,
Right.
on
the
each side
overhead
of the
poles.
tracks.
Yeah,
You just have one in the middle with a T-bar,
yeah.
and having closer tracks would make, you know,
But they're gonna go
your
with 3
T-bar wouldn't be
tracks
as wide.
under their, weren't they wind up with 3 tracks?
Well, that's high-speed rail, Greg. That's not Caltrain electrification.
Right.
Yeah, and it's blended system.
That's one of the bypass tracks that they've looked at for high-speed rail.
Okay.
Although conceivably, and you're probably right on the rationale for trying to add the 3rd track, but there is a Caltrain only argument for adding a 3rd rail, which is that it makes it easier to support local service while still supporting the bullet trains.
Yeah, well, that's true.
I remember that meeting, and I remember looking at the options, and I know we have concerns about the slippery slope, both with electrification and so forth, but for me personally, I don't even know if we are part of the input in deciding whether they put in a 3rd track and whether they put the wiring down the middle versus the side and so forth, but I have some concerns about what was mentioned earlier, that our community might be viewed as excessively obstruction-ish on basically growth in the area, and I personally think that it might be to our benefit, even with the slippery slope argument, which I agree with, that it might be to our benefit if Caltrain asks for a third track, that we not necessarily oppose it too strongly.
Mhm.
I would like to make a comment on that. At the public hearing last summer, late last summer, when the first environmental impact statement was put forth, it was in Redwood City. And what Marilyn Lacy, what alluded to is there was such an uproar and opposition for having 3 tracks that Caltrain backed off.
Really?
Yes, that is what she seemed
I
to say.
did not know that, huh? I thought they would pay for something like that, because it helps them with the bullet trains and stuff.
Well,
but-
the bypass tracks were proposed by their consultant that looked into the merging of Caltrain and high-speed rail services. As Narissa says, that created a lot of fuss because of the pressure on the right-of-way and the potential need to take land.
Okay.
If you look
But
at.
I guess it's moot then, if they're taking it off the table.
Her exact words were, we heard you, there's big opposition to putting in a 3rd rail, so we're not talking about that.
Oh, okay,
That was verbatim.
interesting, okay.
Now, it's interesting to note, Scott, that is not what the high-speed rail people say. In a meeting, I don't know, 2 months ago, I don't remember the date, Frank Baca, who's one of their chief engineers, stated that they were going to probably make 3 or 4 grade separations down the Caltrain line, and they would do whatever other things would need to be done in order to make it possible for their trains to travel to Los Angeles in 2 hours and 40 minutes. And, that's somewhat different attitude.
What you hear from Caltrain.
It gets back to the whole Northeast Corridor, where the Acela electric trains only meet a high speed for 6 minutes near Warren, Rhode Island.
Yeah, that's right.
That still stands.
They spent $2 billion to improve that track between Washington and New York. I don't know how much they spent on the Boston end, but they didn't do nearly enough. I mean, that's the basic problem with high-speed rail. You have to have very straight, very accurate track, and it needs to be exclusively high speed.
Precisely, that's the.
And
Constantly maintained.
they
They're
have,
sharing.
yeah, it has to be carefully maintained regularly. The French, for example, send a train down their lines every morning before they start revenue service to be sure that nothing has happened overnight. And they were unwilling to do that in the Northeast Corridor, so what they have is very much less than high-speed rail. And what they're talking about doing on the peninsula is of the same order. It's the same sort of thing. Okay, Quadgate discussion. Greg?
Well, let me, if you let me make my comments about the last meeting, and then I'll talk about Quad Gates, because I think.
All right.
You know, they had a come to Jesus meeting last week, the board, because they have a new executive director. And they've had 10 fatalities, 1 fatality a week this year, and they had another one since the meeting, so they've had 11 fatalities, and at the rate they're going, they will probably have somewhere between 20 and 50 fatalities this year. So it's reaching a point where they realize that they're gonna have to do something. And the obvious action is to grade separate every intersection. That would be the only way to assure, virtually assure, solving the problem. But the cost of that is so expensive that they really don't think it's a solution. But they spent an hour going through this with the board. First, the sheriff's office got up and talked about what patrolling they're doing now. They have 3 or 4 or 5 people full-time patrolling the intersections in Palo Alto. And the sheriff's office mentioned the training that they provided those people and the number of people that they've saved lives as a result of those patrol people. So that raises a question for us, if, whether we would want that. I think Palo Alto is paying for it. I don't think, if I thought about it a minute, I could figure that out, but I think Palo Alto was paying for those guards, I'm not sure. And they're starting to complain because it's getting so expensive. But that was the first segment, and then the second segment, Chuck Harvey talked about the engineering, and the engineering part of it, and I have a presentation here. The main points of the engineering were grade separations first, holdout stations second, grade crossing safety improvements, and fencing and signage were the four, and technology. And he went through each of those with a separate slide. And in the grade separations, he talked about the crossings that have been installed. And I think there's 8 intersections that have been completed, and then you've had 4 intersections where they closed them down, which is the ultimate safety. So they have no crossing. And then they talked about the holdout station and said that they had 17 holdout stations. They've completed remodeling 15 of them, and there's 4 to go, and one of them is Atherton. So that's that, and they show a picture of what it would look like after it's been remodeled. And then they went on and talked about fencing. And when I was on the PUC many years ago, I got them $1 million through various means for fencing. But if I recall, it cost about $70 million to fence the whole right-of-way. And I think I did not bring that up because I didn't have time to do that. But I think
would be a lot more today.
Huh?
That would be a lot more today.
Well, maybe, but it was only 4 or 5 years ago. But fencing is certainly, that would help. And there's a big debate about whether people commit suicides at the station or whether they do it away from the station. And I know the articles that were written 3 or 4 years ago said that virtually no suicides are done at the station. People are not going to be embarrassed enough to commit suicide in public, that they're going someplace where it's private. So fencing would, like the prince that was crawled out the bushes right up here in Menlo. I mean, he could have gone off with the station, but he crawled under the bushes. And we still don't have fencing here in Atherton, and I've been complaining about that for 5 years or more.
We've never had any fencing here.
They have fencing in Palo Alto, and the people go through, you can't fence off an at-grade crossing.
You can
So
if,
they go,
well, they could go to the station,
they
but
do it. And there's also people, I personally know a family who lost their son at a station.
yeah, at a station, I'm saying, but normally that is not the way they do it because they're too embarrassed.
Oh, I don't know about the normally, but
Well,
it does.
But they don't agree with that.
that's-
Now, there's 2 schools of thought, so they're concentrating on both the stations and the right-of-way. But I just want to say that they talked about the fencing and technology. Now, Palo Alto's talking about putting a light down the right-of-way in both directions, I guess, to disturb any, to register any movement.
That would
So if there's
stop the
anybody
trains.
on the tracks, they would get a signal and they could stop the train. But
Well,
they-
I can just imagine the fun and games
Yeah.
of young
Yeah.
boys and dropping things.
Well, they would
over
only
that
do it
signal.
once, because I think they'd wind up in jail, because this is a serious matter.
Well, it is a serious matter, but it's a terrific temptation.
I have a question. Is the assumption then that 100% of the deaths are from suicides?
Well, no, they've gone through the fatalities over the last 5-10 years, and there's been 131 fatalities over the last 10 years. And of those, it averages 13 a year, and 10 of them have been suicides, and so 2 or 3 of them would be accident. And I think the Ravenswood accident has heightened the whole situation.
Yeah.
There were over 100 people that responded on the Almanac's article
Yeah.
on that intersection.
I think it's because of the volume of.
Well, that's a terrible intersection.
They've already-
I go through that frequently, and I can, the thing I don't understand is why the woman didn't have sense enough to get out of the
Get
car.
out of
and
the
run.
car.
Get out and go.
Yeah.
Instead, she just sat there and the train came.
All right, well, after they made their presentation, I came up and spent 2 minutes saying, hey, the answer is grade separations. In Los Angeles, we built a trench 20 miles for 1.5 billion. When I was on the California Transportation Commission, and I think that's ultimately the answer here. But somebody needs to get, to get the funds and the planning to get it done. And I think the PUC needs to be more involved. They are ultimately responsible for rail safety in California. And the California Transportation Commission also has rail responsibility. And I think those two agencies need to get more involved. They are not getting involved. They should be at all these meetings, and they should get their foot and their toe in the water and come up with answers to help solve it, because they also have power that, Caltrains and these individual cities don't have, especially California.
Do they have money?
Yeah, Transportation Commission.
On that, I read an article that said that there's a JPB or some entity that actually has about $250 million already reserved that they estimate would take care of 4 grade crossings. I can try.
The Transportation Authority has $400 million cash.
So there's funding for limited grade separations.
And all of that is dedicated to projects. But, when, I don't know. But they're sitting there with a pile of cash, and they're killing one person a week. And I just think that is unacceptable. As a former public servant in both the Transportation Commission and the PUC, that is, if I were still there, that is unacceptable. And I don't know what I would do, but I would do something. And I think they need to do something, because I don't think the public's gonna put up with it. And it's just a matter of and we got a new executive general manager, and I suggest that we bring him to this meeting next month and sit down eyeball to eyeball, if he'll meet with us, and have a come to Jesus meeting with him. Because he's got no background in what these issues, so he's got no prejudice one way or the other. Even though he was on the High-Speed Rail Commission, I don't know if he's resigned.
And he was on the JPB at one point too.
Jim Hartnett.
Jim Hartnett.
Yeah, but was he on the JPB?
I believe so.
Yes, for a long time.
Quite a few
Not-
terms.
Not in the last 10 years.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Redwood City
Many
representative.
terms, several terms.
We went to him several times to get assistance from
Well,
us.
I still think we should try, because we've been suing them, and we've been and I've been complaining every meeting for at least 5 years. And I think it's only fair that, and I think they would sit down with us, because they don't have the answer either. They admit it.
Well,
Because these fatalities are gonna bring everything to a head. That's what I was saying. We can talk about the high-speed rail till hell freezes over. But if you start killing a person a week for the next 10 years, you're talking about 500 people.
But they're not killing somebody, somebody's killing themselves. It's very hard to stop a suicide.
Well, not if you put it in a trench, or you elevate it. Barton has 1 fatality a year. So, it can be done.
Yes, I agree.
And I just don't know some people say, well, it's not our responsibility to stop these people from, I tell you, if you don't have a safe operation from the level of 1 person a week, this isn't I'm an accountant, it's not an accounting function, it's human lives we're talking about. So something's gotta be done, and I think we as a city have the opportunity to do something. I don't know how far you'd wanna go, but you could have a patrol guard here yourself. Palo Alto's got 3 or 4. But they've had problems because they've let high school students have committed suicide.
Rosemary?
Are we still on,
Well,
5E quad gates?
Yeah, well,
Well, I'll go back to that now if you
That's how we
want.
started.
I jumped over to this just so I could,
It was an innocuous question, is that where we were?
Yes, that's
Yeah.
where we were.
I read in the newspaper, and I don't know which one, but it was something local, where a man had interviewed George Rodriguez. And I didn't know the interviewer, was not at the interview. But the implication was that we couldn't have quad gates in Atherton because they were too expensive, and we needed 2 sets.
Well, we have one set.
We have one set.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, they did a
Is the-
demonstration, they call it a demonstration at Fair Oaks, so we've got that.
Yeah, I know we have quad gates. Is there any question that Mr. Rodriguez doesn't know that we don't have to buy another 2 sets, just one?
No, the city manager is well aware of what we have and what we don't have, and he's also well aware of the cost, and I've never, ever heard him say that it's cost prohibitive. It's just that it is expensive, so the town just needs to continually work on getting the funding.
Must have been an error in the reporter's notes or something.
They do that sometimes.
Well, we could make a recommendation to the council that they increase their allocation to quad gates, because I think if we put up enough money, I think we'd shame them into,
Well, they
completing
put $100,000
Yeah.
out.
Right. But if
which
we up that to
should-
200 or
should be a
300,000.
handshake, but so far Caltrain has not risen to
well,
that.
we haven't really asked them.
We pointed out to them several times that money is there. You have and I have.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but it hasn't been through Mike or,
Oh, no, there's been Caltrains is very clear that, a very high priority for the town is quad gates. They're very clear on that.
well, maybe we should ask them, how much money would you want us to put up to do it? I mean, they
have
would
There's
probably
an easy
overestimate.
answer
We
to
have
that, all of
that,
it.
for sure, in our notes.
Well, we know all of it for sure, but I'm sure that they would back down to
May I ask, how many deaths have there been in Atherton
2.
in 10 years?
No, we had one just a couple of months ago. Right? Like right over
Right
on
here,
Fair
right
Oaks,
here in
just this year.
Unlucky.
Yeah.
Well, maybe it's 3 then.
Not one.
Well, Mike, do
There
you?
might have been one.
It's between Fair
We
Oaks
had
and
one up
Waterbury.
there that you're talking about, not too far.
Sat down in front of the.
I believe he was, it's point of hit and point of rest are 2 different locations.
Oh, this was 3
Oh.
4 months ago.
So, sorry, the accident may have occurred in Menlo Park, but the ending point was Fair Oaks.
Oh, my goodness.
Well,
And it was-
Greg,
And it was suicide.
Greg makes a really good point about the methods you use to prevent it. 3 years ago, the state proposed that from San Francisco to San Jose, there'd be like a 40-foot viaduct, the whole peninsula. See, if they have a viaduct, that takes care of everything. The whole system is elevated. You have 47 grade crossings between San Francisco and San Jose. That's a lot, which means every time you have a grade crossing, you have to go up, then you have to come down, you have to plop, going up again, like getting between Fair Oaks and Watkins. What in the hell would you do? That's about 300 feet. So it's a mess, and each grade crossing, Martin Engel and I used to make an estimate, it's $100 million, so that's $4.7 billion to have grade crossings. They don't even have the money to tunnel from 4th and King, the Caltrain stop, to the new Transbay Terminal. That's $3 billion.
Well, Palo Alto's going ahead with a tunnel, a trench from San Antonio.
They don't have any money.
Well, they're planning it.
They're planning. We met with them last meeting
Right.
and specifically asked them, where are you gonna get the money? And they said, we don't know, we don't have any money.
Well, I'll tell you what, the number of fatalities we're getting, I think the money will appear.
Well, that would be most helpful.
It's funny how government works.
So,
That's the way it works.
just for the record, we do keep quite an eye on the tracks, even though like Palo Alto, we do, and we respond to any call of anybody lingering near the tracks.
Is that right?
Absolutely, so.
We, the police.
We the
Yeah.
police, so, and even though it's not our technical jurisdiction, because the tracks are not our.
Well, that's
so
done.
We are out there more than they're out there, so.
More than
the required bodies, because the amount of bodies that are required to do the length of the track, for the track responsibility, police department, sheriff's department responds to anything inside a car, that's Homeland Security, runs through the tracks just in case there's anything that happens on the tracks of the trains, they're all regular on the trains, but track responsibility, any accident on the tracks is not investigated by us, it's not our jurisdiction, but we do, believe me, anything that goes on or near and regular patrols go by there, it is equally of concern to the town
Well, that's good,
and the police department, so.
that's good.
Well, and we have a large enough police department that we probably have more saturation than the Caltrain police force is really quite small.
It's very small, and you know, when you had mentioned that the accidents that occur in the stations, even though we don't have an active station, a lot of Menlo Park does the same thing. They will respond to anybody lingering near the station. There are a share of homeless that actually have areas near the tracks. We are constantly making sure nobody is on or near the tracks. So, you know, we can't do anything about somebody that sneaks up on the tracks because, like you say, they're not in a tunnel and they're not above ground, so.
Well, we could ask Caltrains to lease fence our territory, cause that's not a big deal, I don't know, we've never, I don't know, we've been talking about that for 10 years.
But I think that to most people's point, anywhere where there's a roadway, there's not gonna be able to fence that. And so if somebody wants to, they're gonna walk on a roadway, park at the park, walk on a roadway, and get into the tracks. So there's not a whole lot we can do about that. But quad gates will help us with vehicle traffic and pedestrians.
And
But
bicycles.
anybody that wants to do it, they're gonna find a way.
And everyone's property that borders the tracks has got a fence on it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And frankly, the way that people have been getting in is roadway access. It's not through
Yeah.
residence.
Access through the grade crossings and walk up or down the track.
The reason I said what I didn't ask the questions is because I sense that Caltrain is backing off of the quad gate.
Well, they haven't done any, so it's,
Well,
it's,
they're moving themselves farther back.
Yeah, and just for the town's position, we are constantly pushing quad gates.
Good.
Because we need we got one more location that we want, and we're pushing it, and matter of fact, it's in the discussions you guys are surely having, because we do have concerns, we're pushing. So-
well, it would help, we'd get a quiet zone probably,
Right.
if we did a quad gates and wide
We
gates.
could, that's
Yeah,
right.
sure.
That's what's.
So at least you can sleep better
That would be nice.
at night.
Well, I think too, the whole quality along here, the library, the city council, you know, all, this whole corridor, if you're gonna put a new, town hall here, there's no way to make, you'd have to have a very, very thick masonry wall with virtually no windows, no openings, in order to isolate yourself from that sound. Its mass is the only thing, solid mass, the equivalent of a concrete wall around the entire perimeter. And the issue is height. Sound still comes in height. I mean, I've consulted with an acoustical engineer. So it would affect the quality of life for a new city council hall as
That's right.
well. I mean, it's affecting everybody, not just the people. We live in Lloyden Park. You can hear the train all through Lloyden Park. You know, you
Yep.
can hear it at El Camino. It's the horn because the dB level is so high.
That's right.
And you can't just put up a fence along the train. The sound carries right around in front of
Well,
it.
trench would help, but.
Oh, yeah, it would be fabulous, but I'm just saying, I don't see, in lieu of that happening, which that could take a very long time, this is something that could be accomplished if the money were there, in fairly short order. And I just don't want Caltrain to be able to back off of that position, that's all, that was where I was
Well,
coming from.
they're more attentive now. I'm not sure what their action is, but we'll just have to wait and see.
Well, they have all of their attention on their electrification project. It's already gone $300 or more million over their initial estimates, and they don't have the money to finish it. Why things they do cost so much money, we don't know. Perhaps with a new general manager, they'll get their accounting sorted out a little bit. That would be a nice thing.
I hate to take any more time, but I did mention the engineering problem with the German airplane. You know, there was a radio discussion about trains,
Yeah.
engineers and trains, only one instead of two. And so that is, and Caltrain's responded by saying that if they put in the positive train control, that they would be able to control the trains from being speeded up by a rogue engineer. And it would prevent it from head-on collisions, the positive train control.
Presumably.
Because it's
They have-
supposed to be monitored by a supervisor as well, so not only do you have the train people, but you also have the supervisor that's mobile is monitoring at the same time.
But they're gonna have to address that, cause it's gonna be a public issue,
Well,
whether
and-
they should have two engineers
Unless they
on
have a
every train.
master hacker,
Right.
the master hacker
Thanks, Mike.
gaining control of the train from remote.
And there it comes, next movie.
Yeah,
that homegrown system is gonna take a lot of shaking down before it will do the things they say it should.
well, it's gonna be very expensive to
Yeah,
have
but
two
the reason-
engineers, but that may be the answer.
Easter,
Yeah.
not Halloween, it sounds like Halloween.
Okay, I think we've gone on about as far as we're likely to. Are there any more comments that committee and staff members would be interested in making tonight?
I just have a brief one,
Please.
and it didn't make the agenda because I just didn't submit it, but I was finally able to attend a Dumbarton Rail meeting. After being appointed about 2 years ago, I finally was able to go. So I think many of you are already familiar with the background. So there was a regional measure 2 created funding for Dumbarton Rail, about $91 million. A few years ago, the MTC requested a loan of that 91 to go to BART, and then last year they wanted to forgive the loan.
They what?
They wanted to forgive the loan, so they want BART basically to keep the money. I did a little research on this because a lot of this predated me, and apparently Transdev was interested in trying to represent, well, I'm not sure who they would represent. I guess they couldn't find anyone to sponsor a lawsuit, but the long and the short of it is, it looks like MTC's been successful. The money has been taken from Dumbarton Rail, and so there's effectively no funding for it. On a personal note, it was hard to find regional measure 2 language, but I was able to find some that seems kind of questionable whether what they did was legal. But it is what it is. If it's legal if you can get away with it, I guess is the rule. But that said, there was so effectively the project is sort of on hold. But there's some optimism that perhaps getting some of the Silicon Valley companies to offer some funding for Dumbarton Rail, there's some optimism that may happen. And there was a lady there who has been doing a lot of investigative work, and I forgot her name. Malcolm was at the meeting.
The Stanford student?
She is a Stanford student,
Right,
you're right.
yeah.
She pointed out some reasons why some Silicon Valley companies might be interested in participating, particularly Facebook, because
It's
Dumbarton
right
Rail
there.
goes right by there. Regional Measure 2 actually mandated that that there be a station at the Sun Microsystems location. Because Sun used to be there, and now Facebook's there. And with all the building that Facebook's doing, they just opened up another building as part of their campus, and they're doing more. So Facebook will probably be more and more interested in having Dumbarton Rail open up. So there's some interest there. But for the most part, there's no money. So right now, it's all just speculation what the next steps are.
So Scott, we were the only town that objected to the release of those funds. We were the only one that sent a letter to the TA and said, we object. We should be using this as a negotiation tool. If we're going to be negotiating, we want to keep the corridor, we want some form of funding. So members of the TA, including Alicia Algueri, who represents the TA, came and met with George Rodrigues, myself, and the city attorney, and I believe maybe Mike, and we sat down and we said, we object. They said, well, your filing was too late. We had already released the funds to BART, forgive loan, but that doesn't mean that if a project is viable in the Dumbarton corridor, we wouldn't reconsider the allocation of funds, because the point of the matter is that tax dollars from the county of San Mateo were released for a project solely for the benefit of East Bay users, and we objected to that, and it gives no congested relief to the southern end of the peninsula, and the Dunbarton corridor is a key component with all the development going into the southern peninsula, and
Yeah.
we said, it's foolish not to think of another alternative to get across that bridge. So
Yeah,
we did go on the record.
Oh, okay,
so-
that's great, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
It just, to me, editorializing, it does seem like the MTC is blind to east-west transportation issues.
Mhm.
The
It's all
MTC
north-south.
is entirely a political organization.
Mhm.
It's all horse trading.
Yeah.
Which one is?
MTC.
Yeah.
For some people, maybe even my husband, I feel tongue-tied. I'm not sure when I can make a comment. I have one relevant, I think, to the
Please-
Dumbarton issue, but
please do.
the Dumbarton issue is related to electrification and possibly high-speed rail, so I don't know if I can say anything.
Well,
Oh,
no,
I see.
the Dumbarton corridor is not really tied to
Connected.
high-speed rail at all. They're,
Well, actually,
Connectivity.
I have gone to meetings of both of those issues, electrification and Barton and high-speed rail, and asked what the plans were for relating if Dumbarton Rail were to come across.
Mhm.
They had plans to go north and south on,
On the
Caltrain tracks.
Yes.
and when I asked about how that was related to high-speed rail, and had they done discussions of how to get those trains into the headway related to those three factors, there were no answers. Now, this
Yes.
was a Redwood City meeting about a year and a half ago.
Mhm.
And it's relevant to the town of Atherton, on whose rail committee I sit, because they are talking about passing tracks and
Right.
holding tracks that would be out here, a part of our right-of-way,
Mhm.
so that they could pull a Dumbarton train over and let it sit while the high-speed or the Caltrain went by.
And let it pull in.
And that has to do with our mile and a half
That's
of
right.
right-of-way through the town of Atherton.
That's right.
So when we have any of these meetings, from our point of view, because we're near that intersection, which is just a little bit north of Fifth Avenue, whoever's on these various committees ought to inquire about that.
And just kind of I'm not, clearly not a Brown Act, and I'm not an attorney, but my understanding is it's totally appropriate for you to talk about. I mean, it's not like you're prohibited or saying anything about high-speed rail. In this case, it was because there was a specific agenda item about Prop 1A, and that's why, you were excluded from participating and voting.
Right, and I think it's
Agenda.
voting, right? We're not voting on anything in this
Our-
discussion.
Our instructions from Mr. Conway,
Connors.
the man who came and talked, my understanding was only that it was an issue of voting. I didn't know that,
Yeah.
I never heard that we couldn't participate in the discussion.
Yeah, I mean,
No.
I strongly believe that you do, because by the letter, people were actually supposed to excuse themselves, they're not even supposed to be in the room. You're supposed to excuse yourself and to another location.
If
Well,
there's an
o-
item on the
Over
agenda,
the years, the degree of participation has changed. First, it used to be you couldn't participate, and there's a reason for that. Even if you don't vote, if you're, one of the leaders, person that people look to for opinions and stuff, and you sit there and you give your opinions on A, B, C, and D, and then say, "But I can't vote on it." Well, people are going to follow your lead anyway. So originally it was like you can't vote and you can't discuss it when the council or whatever group it is discussing what they're going to vote on. And then it was like, well, you ought to sit in the audience, don't stay on the panel. And then it was like you have to leave the room. And so it sort of all depends. I would say, this is not legal advice, but the way it breaks out, it kind of depends on how important it is and how big a deal it is. I mean, if it was really a significant thing and you're being televised and all that stuff, yeah, fine, walk out of the room. To make it clear that you didn't sway anybody's vote one way or another. But I don't think we have that kind of situation on most of our items. I don't feel bad about sitting here while everyone discusses a possible blended system lawsuit, and just not saying anything. But if it's something else that's, doesn't relate to a recommendation to the city council or potential litigation, feel free to speak.
So that's all I had on
Okay.
Dunbar.
Thank you, Scott. Other
Thanks for
comments?
attending.
Yeah.
I know.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow, I'm
Yeah.
excited.
Congratulations.
Other comments?
I have a comment.
Oh, sorry.
I noticed on the JPB agenda about 2 meetings ago, there was an item to approve either borrowing or a bond issue for $175 million to pay off expenses that had already been incurred related to high-speed rail. And it seems to me that whatever those expenses are, there's certainly no transparency about who they went to and why. And also, it seems to me for an organization the size of Caltrain that has total liabilities of $112 to $119 million, that taking on something like $175 million that's supposed to be paid for out of revenues is just atrocious. I wasn't at the meeting, but I think that got approved, didn't it? Did the JPB approve
As
it?
I recall, that was approved, yes.
When was that?
About 2 meetings ago.
It was,
Well, I missed that.
Yeah,
it was probably the February meeting, yeah.
and I don't see anything.
It was approved without discussion.
Yeah,
It just
like a
went
lot of
sailing right
things.
through.
But I don't see anything in Caltrain's annual report and annual finances that says they have outstanding loans of $175 million for things they spend for electrification.
I've never seen anything, well, the electrification, the capital budget report shows some expenditures for electrification, and I don't recall how much they were last time I saw one of those. But they've got half a dozen contractors
Yeah,
working for them.
They're working all the time, and I don't know how they're
busily
getting paid.
chipping away. And they have received no money from the rail authorities yet because they can't give them bond money. But they're expecting that.
I don't see how anybody could loan them that kind of money, given their current financial situation.
Oh, it's on the good faith and credit of all of us taxpayers,
Yeah.
Greg.
That's revenue for Caltrain, it's supposed to pay for.
What is their current financial situation? Is this another crisis year, or is this overflow year?
I don't think this is a fiscal emergency.
No, their revenues have gone up over 10% a year because of the increased usage.
Ridership.
Ridership.
No, that's what
Are
it
they
is.
having
Ever since gas prices went up.
But
Are they
that,
having enforcement problems like VTA? Like I've seen stories where VTA's payment is very, very poor. Does Caltrain have that problem too, to the same degree?
they have problem collecting the money from the different counties.
Oh,
every
okay,
year.
but they don't have an excessive problem with people basically bumming a ride.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
No, they do a share of enforcement too.
Mr. Chairman, are you gonna talk about your report that you sent out on the horn?
No, I didn't put that on the agenda. I'd like to postpone that until our next.
Yeah, I put it on, because the summary recommendations there are very good, and
Yes, they
next
are.
meeting, I will make a motion that we adopt those. I just read them, and they just say, hey, get yourself a consultant, file the report, and you'll have a quiet zone before you know it.
Yeah, Yeah, I thought that was a very useful document, but I got it after the agenda was planned for this
So we'll put it on the
meeting, so
agenda next
we'll
time.
have it on the agenda next time.
Oh. Can I ask that the Public Works Department or somebody find out which trees are marked out here between Watkins and Fifth Avenue, which is roughly our right of way, I
Yeah.
think,
Yeah,
on both sides? I know they've done it on the west side, I don't know about the east side.
In
What do you
the
think?
original,
We do it again?
tree inventory, there were, the only
I
trees
like
that
your
were gonna come
knowledge.
down were to be on the east side.
Yeah,
That
I
was
know
done by
all
one
about the
contract.
original one, that I know, but they just did it a
Right.
few weeks ago.
But that was based on a distance formula.
Yeah,
I think it still is.
Yes, exactly,
And I
that's
don't
my point.
know if an official report's been filed yet.
Right, yeah, they've been, it's my understanding they've been marking trees, but not for the purpose of saying this tree's gonna be down, come down. They're just identifying locations. They have not yet refined the design to even know where the poles are gonna be and what trees are gonna be affected.
well, their previous one identified, removal, severe pruning, and moderate, or whatever.
Right, and that was kind
So they
of.
did that, yeah,
Right.
that was when they had the wide right of way.
Right, and
But they have now marked them again, and I don't know what it was interesting to find out, they have their sign is a silver disc with a number. For several years, we've had triangular signs out there on some of them, red plastic ones, very professional looking, numbered also. And Hort Science has done both the current and the previous survey, and they said if the man named Ryan somebody, I don't remember his last name, he appeared to be in charge. He didn't know who they came from. It wasn't Hort Science, according to him. The town has always said they didn't know anything about it. So I don't know what goes on, but all the pear trees at the depot are marked, and I would have to go to the police department to tell them I wanted to look at the ones that are beyond the depot, so that I would not be picked up for loitering on the tracks.
Save your life.
I have once been called on that.
Not by me.
No, by a policeman, by an Atherton policeman. I was reported by somebody for having been loitering near the tracks. All for this committee, all for this committee.
For the benefit of anyone who hasn't
We can get help.
read
for
the
that.
appendices in the final EIR, they've added a new appendix that has every section along the peninsula as a separate section, and they have color-coded every tree that they've identified that something's going to happen to. And it takes up, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 pages if you want to see that.
And what
And
is
Atherton's part of it.
What is this on?
It's in one of the
EIR.
appendices to the final EIR for electrification.
Oh, I think
I forget which
I
one.
already
Those
know
4,000
that.
pages
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
But I just thought I would like to see what their plans are now for the most recent survey. And since we only have a mile and a half, in terms of their big job from San Francisco to San Jose, I would think a request from your office might get that heads up warning about awareness and see what we can do about it if there's anything to be done, or just provide information.
Also, the formula is, and it varies depending on where you read in the appendix, but it's 22 to 24 feet from the outermost track
Right.
is their electrification clearance zone. So if the tracks were moved closer together, that would shift everything accordingly. There would be less
Exactly.
trees
Yeah,
cut
that's
down,
right.
less pruning, et cetera.
Yeah.
Oh, but there was very clearly last time, you know, there was a survey, and the only trees that were to be removed in Atherton are on the Middlefield Road side of the track.
Yeah.
There is absolutely
Yeah.
none on this side of the track. There's some possible pruning, and they list those, they have the tree inventory.
How we doing? We about done?
It's like a kid in the backseat of the car.
I wanna go home, mommy.
Do you wanna make a motion?
Hey, I'll move if it's appropriate.
I think
I'll-
the chairman
I'll
gets to
second.
decide.
You
All
second?
right, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.